Welcome. For the 5 people who actually subbed when I posted my last video, you may notice that this voiceover is different. I had plans to fix my audio so this year's video wasn't as ass as last year's in terms of listenability, but I got lazy and put it off until midway through November when I started writing this script, and thus, I decided to outsource like any good lazy bastard. Was already doing that for the editing, and thought might as well continue for the audio, at least this time. Do not get comfortable with the voice, no solid plans for it to be a permanent thing. For those new to my channel, and those who haven't watched my last video, don't. I'll be reiterating a lot of what I said in my last video, and there's nothing from my first Isekai experiences video that's unique to that year. Only my general favorite recommendations, which I will go over here, mainly unchanged with some minor differences. To start off with, I should explain what I coin as an Isekai, so to speak. An Isekai is a genre which involves someone or multiple people being transported/transmigrated/reincarnated into another real world. This can either mean another universe altogether, or another planet. The only things I don't deem isekais are small stuff, like pocket dimensions or VR MMO types, where someone is just playing a virtual world. Overall, a very broad range that can include fantasy stories as well as sci-fi stuff. There's also various types of isekai. Standard isekai being someone or multiple people from a world like our own being the involvees in what happens. Reverse isekai, which is the opposite, with someone or multiple people from some different world coming to one like our own. And the third type of isekai, which involves somebody or multiple people from a world unlike our own going to another world that's also not similar to ours as well. This third type of isekai is the rarest, and doesn't have an official name, although I have thought of a couple of potential ones like Observer's Isekai and Spectator's Isekai. Something to note, its detachment to anything similar to the reader, which is common among isekai, but the names aren't too catchy. The specific details around isekai, though, and the common misconceptions that people have when thinking of the genre, is a topic worthy of its own video to address, so I will be moving on. Since we've established what an isekai is, I'll be moving on to talking about my history with reading isekai before talking about the specific ones I've read this year, before finishing off with my general all-time favorites and recommendations. I have read isekai for 9 years as of late 2022, going on 10 full years, although I would say that I didn't really get into isekai until 2015. But I did start in 2013 as my absolute earliest. I started with anime in general in 2013, where I watched the reverse isekai anime The Devil is a Part-Timer, regular isekai anime Problem Children Are Coming from Another World, Aren't They?, and Log Horizon, as well as having delved into the rabbit hole of Minecraft self-insert fanfictions. I can feel the arthritis in my bones as I see people talk about the Merryweather and Japanese Minecraft manga, but never mention the old guard of Mob Talker. I can't completely remember for sure what happened in 2014, although I know I got into manga at that time, and I'm pretty sure that I also dabbled into the Rise of the Shield Hero web novel that was being translated at the time. But I either caught up or put it off, or only got through a bit of it and left it for a later time. During this time, I read Ore to Kazuko-san no Isekai Haruki, which introduced me to the stereotypical isekai in manga form. Isekai, though, during this time was extremely fresh on the block. More of the old ones that I'm familiar with and seen actually started serializing during the latter half of 2014, such as Konjiki no Wordmaster and Shinka no Mi, along with some more niche and more garbage ones like Boko wa Isekai, De Fuyu Maharu, to Shokan Mahu, Otome ni Kakeru. During this time and before it, I was still primarily watching/reading plain fantasy stuff, such as Maoyu Yusha, and Yusha ni Narikata Ore wa Shibu Shushoko wo Ketsu Shimashita. I'm not too sure if I would recommend Mau Yusha. A recent tried rewatch, I couldn't get past the first episode without hardcore cringing, but Yusha ni Narinakata should still be a decent show. It wasn't until the middle of 2015 when I would first really start reading web novels and light novels, with my first one that I started reading being an Isekai light novel series known as The New Gate, which I started in May of that year. I would binge and eventually read the ending to Rise of the Shield Hero web novel, when its final chapter was finally translated in the June on Yorakun's website. Small side note, Yorakun recently got DMCA'd and now had to private all of the web novels from his site, but you can still find the chapters in other ways, both through other sites and archived means. 2 months later, I would go deep into reading and subscribe to numerous different translation groups. Sosetsuka, who is translating Death March, Nanodesu, who is translating several, like Hai to Genso no Gingal, Shriya, who was translating So What If It's an RPG World, Neo Translations, who did The Man Picked Up by the Gods, and just a lot more. This was also the time when the edgy MCs and Dark World trend was popular, where you basically saw numerous stories of bullied/abused MCs being translated, like Korunumao. Most were, as you expect, complete trash, though there were some decent ones like Korunumao, although I never completed it, so I can't vouch to whether it has a good ending or not. I thought that this trend died off, but considering the recent surge in edgy isekai and fantasy manga and anime, like Redo of Healer, looks like we might be seeing more anime/manga adaptations of this era in the future. During this time, I also got into the English web novel community as well on Royalroad, and would make an account on the site on the 10th of August, where I would use the site for 5 or 6 months before I would, for the time, focus exclusively on the Asian translations. During this time, the hip thing was there being dungeon core and monster and reincarnation stories, along with the usual VR MMO and other standard isekai title. Notable titles that fellow geriatrics like me remember include, but are not limited to, Forgotten Conqueror, Ocean, The Slime Dungeon, Beyond, The Beginning After the End, Blackthorn, A Dragon Gnawing Its Tail, Fantasia, The Iron Teeth, A Goblin's Tale, How to Avoid Death on a Daily Basis, and so much more. If you are curious to look at the archives over what hit/popular weekly active trending over the years, links to the web archives will be posted below. I would eventually decide to switch my focus to fully reading Asian isekais and other translated novels for reasons I'm not really sure I remember now. I might have just decided to focus on the novels I know were being translated because they were already going on for a long time. I would continue to use the subscription service provided by translator sites, as well as novel updates to occasionally see if there was anything new I wanted to read. This continued through the rest of 2016, until the very start of 2017, when I discovered my inner scumbaggery and found a novel pirating site known as Novel Planet. Shout out to the about 2,000 people who likely use the site, but for everyone else who undoubtedly haven't heard of the site, it was the sister novel site to Kiss Anime and Kiss Manga. It did everything and more. A simple, nice-on-the-eyes layout, a simple tab that lists new novels that just got started translating, or those that were just posted, and best of all, it didn't only rip from novel updates. As much as novel updaters seethed and cobed about this site not supporting translators, Novel Planet was superior in that it hosted novels that went behind paywalls, and that the translators had shut down on their sites, whether it be due to author DMCAs or other reasons. It held Release That Witch, Gourmet of Another World, Monster Factory, Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint. Really, just a lot of novels that were hidden behind paywalls on webnovel.com and other places as well. I would make Novel Planet my sole site, and I would use it religiously for over 2 years straight, from early 2017 to late 2019. It is not an exaggeration when I say that 95% of the isekai and other stories that have gotten manga and anime adaptations in at least the years coming up to 2022, I have a bare minimum seen pass through the new releases and decided whether or not I would skip it based on its title, summary, and cover. This wasn't just for isekai. I would give most novels, even non-isekai, this glance. There were some quite good non-isekai that came out during this time, but that's a different topic. I also came to understand that Chinese web novels are in general complete edge shit, and those who like it are generally insufferable cringe lords. But that's another topic all of its own. I know that in the 2+ years I spent reading Asian translated isekais, There's only 4 Chinese isekai novels off the top of my head that I actually enjoyed. There was being Release That Witch, The Defeated Dragon, Daddy Fantasy World Restaurant, and Gourmet of Another World. And the only one I can confidently say I recommend is Release That Witch, as The Defeated Dragon was dropped by its translator due to having an unliked ending, and I haven't finished Daddy Fantasy World Restaurant or Gourmet of Another World. But even Release That Witch has its own rushed, controversial ending that people debated over, as well as story directions that some might get put off by. Regardless, I did enjoy the story in its entirety, ending included, so if there is any Chinese story I would say to read, it would be this one. There is countless isekai that was being translated during the time. Perhaps some of you will recognize some of these names. Isekai Tensei So Yuki, My Pet is a House Maiden, The Elf is a Freeloader, The Duke's Daughter is the Knight's Captain, 62 Young Wife, Instant Death, Ortena Seki, Lazy Dungeon Master, I'm a NEET but when it comes to Hello Work I got taken to another world, Nitoko Otoko no Tanoshi Isekai Boeki, The Man Picked Up by the Gods, Skeleton Knight, In Another World, Rune Troopers, Nihon Koku Shokan, and my entire class has been reincarnated. I became the weakest skeleton. I know that some of these have definitely gotten manga and even anime adaptations, although whether they deserved it is another matter. I can't sit here for 30 minutes and list off every single isekai I've seen go by though, so let's wrap up this segment of the video. During this time, I read a lot, and I saw trends come and go. I saw the translation of The World of Otome Games is Tough for Mobs start off a cataclysmic title translation wave of unironic villainous isekai novels. I saw the cheats isekai become more and more saturated, to the point of pure excessiveness. I also saw authors taking completely ripe ideas, like back-and-forth transportation magic seen in going back and forth between Earth and the other world with space-time magic, and completely fucking the story by doing half-assed harem slice-of-life shenanigans over and over again. Here is where I made the realization. English isekai is usually better than Japanese isekai. I have had a lot more favorite stories overall with English web novels than I have had with Asian web novels. This would lead me to eventually returning to Royal Land in late 2019. Up until Novel Point was shut down without warning, which I still seethe over, in May 2022, I would read both Asian translations and the English web novel community. Once Novel Planet went down, along with the takedowns of Kiss Anime and Kiss Manga later that year, I would take off anime and manga and Asian novels entirely and focus on reading English web novels. This led me full circle, and got me into reading fanfictions again, although with a slightly higher standards than I had had 7 years prior, with the use of Spacebattles and fanfiction.net starting from May of 2020, and that has been the primary thing I did, reading both English original novels and fanfiction for about a year and a half. There were sporadic times when I caught up on some manga, but besides that, I wasn't really spending much time on Asian media. Only in the winter season of 2021 did I get a bit back into watching some anime, as well as going through my manga and trying to complete those which are already done serializing, as well as glancing at some new ones. In 2022, I spent a decent time in the start of the year mainly reading web novels up till April, when I did decide to spend most of that month and a bit of the start of May reading some manga as well. Unfortunately, nothing too noteworthy of the web novels that I did read, since a lot of the new isekais that I did try went on hiatus, and mainly just some catching up on others I had already been reading. One name that I could give out that's still going strong though was Mage Among Superheroes. I, as of now, only read up to 30 chapters, with there being about 100 now, but it was a pretty decent one that I liked and plan to get back to around eventually. As for the manga I read, you can see most of what I read on the screen as of now. Some stuff that I wasn't able to add to MAL was Good Luck Hero, a reverse isekai webtoon, and webtoon character Na Kang Lim, an isekai into a manhwa world. This would eventually lead me to finally biting the bullet and making a new account on Analyst, especially after MLA implemented a new dumb rating system, where they removed the star system they used to have front and center on their reviews and put the score at the very bottom of a review. Between early May and late June, I was spending most of my time reading fanfiction. Although I spent the vast majority of the year doing that, I spent most of my free time, especially during the period reading stuff like that. Granted, most fanfiction falls under the definition of isekai when it comes to crossovers and self-inserts, but I didn't really bother to catalog the stuff I was reading at specific dates, and as currently I am writing this script, I do not want to dig through my email notifications and accounts on the sites that I use to make a timeline of the stuff I read. Perhaps next year. For the few curious, I use FF, Spacebattles, AO3, and QuestionableQuesting. Spacebattles is the place with the highest quality stories, and is also used as a place for original fanfiction as well. You can see some stories cross-posting on it in Royalroad. Following this is kind of a toss-up between QuestionableQuesting, an NSFW version of Spacebattles, and AO3, on which is better. They each have their cringe parts, QuestionableQuesting having really low-quality stories involving harem gacha shit, and AO3 having annoying second-person use stories. Both still have a lot of high-quality stories, though. FF, of course, comes dead last. Not that you can't find good stories on there, but most are already cross-posted on other sites, and most of the exclusive stories on FF aren't anything to write home about. I would recommend the 3 sites excluding FF as good places to read, although I don't recommend posting on there. Spacebattles and QQ both have some really eye-rolling social fake leftism Twitter tier takes on there and in their rules, so I really just recommend to lurk and not really bother interacting with the greater community. AO3 really doesn't have any issues, but some authors seem to be too lazy to want to go through the waiting process to sign up, so if you can see, there are a lot of stories missing that are on other sites. At the end of June, I watched the 2 isekai anime Skeleton Knight in Another World, and the Otome game world is tough for mobs. Honestly, Skeleton Knight was pretty mediocre. However, the OP is literal fire, made by one of the best musicians on YouTube and hands down the best highlight of the show. I want to give it some leeway since it was one of the oldest isekais, like 2015-ish for the light novel and the web novel being even older, but the villains in the show are the most generic shit imaginable, so much that I physically rolled my eyes at them. The OP is probably what kept it from being any lower than a 7 for me. As for the Otome mob anime, it felt like a really lackluster adaptation of the original source material, with a lot of other people I saw online saying the same thing as well. You would be better off reading the source material and perhaps just listening to the OP in ED instead. No higher than a 7 as well. I also read a lot of manga then in general, but only a couple isekai manga during this point as well, which you can see on screen. Isekai Seikatsu was a surprisingly good find. 9 out of 10 from me, something which is now in my general recommendations. This is also the time I finally switched over to Analyst, which helped me out since Analyst lists manhwa and other shit that my anime list has refused to put on their platform, which means less stuff I'm having to keep track of on my own. I continue to read manga mainly, but there were some web novels I was reading, though most of them were just stuff I was keeping up to date, with the exception of a couple new web novels that I tried, which hadn't gone to hiatus, being Inescapable Escapism, Modern Patriarch, and the completed novel Underland. However, calling Underland an isekai as a whole is a stretch. There is just a character who is an essential plot point who is an isekai, not the main character. The Way Ahead also finished up at this time and is wrapped up nicely. To wrap up, the web novels for the rest of the year. I mainly just kept up to date with a few of the novels I enjoy, with the addition of only a few more like The Caretaker of Otherworldly Tenets, Stranger Than Fiction, The Young Master, Tales from the Underside, How to Maintain a Questionable System in Progress, and Dungeon Life. Backtracking to the manga and other stuff I was reading, well, you can see on the screen the various isekais I read. Nothing too wild. You can also see me catching up on quite a few isekai, which I was reminded of when I was going through the past stuff I read during this year for the script. Anyway, that's everything up to this point and sums up my last 9 years-ish so far of reading isekai. As for what I recommend, well, I'll give a preface. I might have different preferences than some of you. I generally dislike plain power fantasies, absolutely hate shithead MCs, and don't bother reading one-trick cringe stories like the hero is the strongest but cautious. I typically like stories that focus on world building and character developments, and typically like characters that stay weak/normal power range, although I do make exceptions, as you'll see in my list of recommendations. I'm also a pathetic simp for stories that have scientific-minded MCs and focus on exploring the world's systems as well. If that isn't your cup of tea, you can write off the stories I do list like that, but I would recommend at least giving them a shot. Furthermore, I don't usually bother recommending stories that are on hiatus, or only have a few chapters. Better to not get hopes up, even if they are good, only to have them end abruptly. Starting with my recommendations, I'll go first with the Asian Isekai I have read before going with the English ones. Cooking with Wild Game, God Tier LN, 18 volumes officially English translated as of writing, within 19th on the way soon. Top tier girl and really enjoyable plot. Story has no annoying overpowered cheats that are so many other Japanese isekai gave their MCs. You can find the first 13 volumes fan translated on some old rip sites, I believe. You can also either buy them legally or do a funny. Risou no Himo Setsuka, otherwise known as The Idol Sponger Life, has 8 officially translated volumes. Very nice, and has its own real relationship in it. Highly enjoyable, although some of them might not like the harem that opens up later on. 2 fan translations went up in a total of volume 9, which is, as of writing, still in printing. You can either buy them or pirate them. The World of Otome Games is Tough for Mobs, 9 volumes. Enjoyable MC middle of the road in terms of spine. Not Japanese carpet walk, but not psychotic Chinese destroy the entire extended family either. Nice normal middle ground and enjoyable world building. The Man Picked Up by the Gods. Good isekai story. Recommended it for anyone interested in slimes. When I was going out from my house to stop becoming a Hiki-NEET after 10 years, I was transported to another world. Not that outstanding, but it's a rare one in which he has limited access to his prior world via magical internet and little other cheats. The story primarily relies on him talking on image boards and trying to get help on what he should do. The amusing other-world trading travelogue of Net Auction Guy. A simple story of a man who has a mirror that travels between the 2 worlds and tries to use that to make money. Has a generic Japanese guy passive mentality though, so if you get irrationally angry over that, then skip this. Atelier Tanaka. Cheat overpowered MC, but the story revolves around the comedy of him being a scumbag. Not evil, but just an excessively horny piece of shit. He has a ton of laughable moments. Trash of the Count's Family. I haven't read too much of this, but this is the best Korean isekai that I'm aware I could read. And from what I remember, it was decent. Tondemo Skill de Isekai Haru Meshi. Honestly, very niche and trashy isekai. But if you like the idea of the MC just cooking and the story not taking itself too seriously, I recommend giving the web novel a try. Avoid the manga, it really dropped the score and made the story seem shittier than the web novel did. Never tried the light novel, so I don't know how good it is or isn't. There are also a couple of isekai manga that is required to read if one likes isekai. Isekai Oji-san, very funny isekai manga that involves a old 40-year-old who has come back and tells his story to his nephew. There's an anime as well, but I haven't seen it yet, so I can't vet whether it's good or not. Elf-san wa Yaserianai. Reverse isekai with fantasy girls coming to world who are fat and need to exercise. Not an intellectual masterpiece by any means, but top-tier girls and fun, episodic slice-of-life pilot. Saihate no Paladin. Read the manga, but don't really bother with the anime. The anime tried to skim shit in the later half of the show. Isekai Shokudao. Meh anime, but if you don't like slice-of-life cooking food porn that isn't really too serious, but if you do like fluffy stuff, this will be right up your alley. The web novel has also been completely translated at 127 chapters. However, I haven't personally read it, so I can't vouch on its quality, but the reviews have been highly appraised. Trinity Wonder is an observer's isekai. A mage and a cultivator from 2 different worlds get transported into a sci-fi city. The art is literal god tier, and the story is fun and action-packed. It was a 10 out of 10 for me. Her Summon is an isekai. Very good art and action, but more of a popcorn type story, although there is an interesting story there. Highly recommended reading. Gensao Gourmet is a good manga that I'm sure you can guess by the title alone what it is about. No annoying overpowered MC bulldozing their way through everything. It's just an exploration of a different world's food, culinary, and culture in general. Extremely good art, and it really stands out with the vast amount of races that the manga illustrator draws, which puts it above the rest of the pack of other generic JRPG-like worlds. No Longer Human, in Another World is a recent isekai comedy which takes a dark, broody poet from 1948 into a fantasy world where he essentially goes around trying to kill himself, but shenanigans keep happening. It was a very good read. I audibly laughed from it. Kyojinin summary does it best. An exterminator dies and finds himself in a fantasy world. Without any skill with the sword or wand, he carries on doing what he knows best. Very fun, laid-back story. Honestly, for manga, these are the ones that I'm mainly solid as general recommendations. These were, for me, the vast majority of stories I've given 10s and 9s out of 10. There are a lot more 8 and 7s out of 10s, which are fine stories, but start going into niches that could hit or miss depending on the person, and I don't want to go through the plethora that I have of those. I'll throw out some various names regardless. An evil dragon that was sealed away for 300 years became my friend, reborn as a space mercenary, live dungeon, Isekai cheat survival meshi, high player, Isekai wo koruyaki chu, and a veterinarian in another world. All various ones for slightly different niches that are okay stories, but depend on what you're looking for. Log Horizon, Konosuba, and Mao is a part-timer are all well-known shows that I won't go into in detail besides them being must-watches. Those were all the good isekais that I could remember that I think are objectively worth checking out from the Asian side of the market. Haven't read/seen Mushoku Tensei, yet since I've been putting it off for the overhypedness I've been forcing to hear about it being, quote, the isekai. Moving on to my English web novel recommendations. Most of these are on Royalroad unless specified otherwise. Epilogue, short completed story about people who come back to their original world after an isekai. Drama. Also got a new updated version that was put on Amazon, I believe. Catgirl in the Pantry. Simple completed, young adult romance fantasy reverse isekai with a catgirl from another world. 3 sample chapters on Royalroad, but it's on Amazon for $3. Or you can do a funny. Out of Space is a decent popcorn sci-fi meets fantasy type of story. If that's up your alley, you might enjoy it. Only real problems are slightly rough grammar in the start, and is unfortunately on hiatus for the moment. The Law of Averages is a good isekai in which the MC is transported into an alternate modern reality with superpowers. I would recommend giving it a try. Note, I haven't gotten past chapter 94. I can't verify how good volume 2 is. There is no epic loot here, only puns, is the quintessential dungeon core story of a humane protagonist, extremely fluffy and wholesome. Arkendrathist is a story about a father and a daughter being isekai'd. Pretty good for world building and stands out from the crowd. Forewarning, I haven't kept up with it for a while. I can only verify up to chapter 70. Beware of Chicken is a widely acclaimed Western take on Chinese wuxia. If you are even the slightest bit into cultivation, you are obligated to give this a try. I would recommend even those who generally don't like Chinese novels, like me, to give it a shot as well. First couple of novels are on Amazon, I believe, and you can probably find some free versions somewhere out there as well. Of Men and Dragons is another one that is an observer isekai, being a sci-fi meeting a fantasy world type. I personally really enjoyed it. I say to read it if you want romance and human interacting with non-human species. Hunter or Huntress is an isekai where a man is essentially given prep time before being isekai'd into a floating island fantasy world populated by dragonkin. It revolves around the interactions with the characters, as well as the idea of revolutionizing. It's pretty decent, and if that is your shtick, this might be up your alley. Tian, a lit RPG cultivation isekai, is an observer isekai involving a female cultivator who gets punted into an isekai world where she helps the inhabitants fight the overlord. It's a pretty enjoyable bite-sized story. I recommend giving it a shot. Dungeon Item Shop is a mostly fluffy isekai with a very, very dumb girl who tries to run an item shop. Very enjoyable read to just feel good. Is complete, however I've only gotten up to the first 100 couple chapters. Delve, very good story that goes hard into number crunching and min-maxing. Reborn on a systemless Earth, with a system. Exactly as it sounds. A reverse isekai comedy that doesn't take itself too seriously and is mainly revolving around the character interactions, but has a plot as well. An Unbound Dungeon and its sequel, An Unbound Soul, are good reads with interesting world design. Recommend checking it out, and even if you don't enjoy Unbound Soul, you'll likely enjoy Unbound Dungeon. The Strongest Fencer Doesn't Use Skills is a novel about a fencer who gets isekai'd and absolutely hates the world for going power over actual skill. While the MC is kind of annoying, this novel did make me interested in fencing, which says a lot. Cosmosis is another one isekai, which is essentially an alien abduction story. It tries to explore and build upon unique aliens and cultures, and revolves around the MC trying to get caught up to speed on what's really going on. Really recommended. The Third Law of Cultivation, She equals MC squared, is another rare exception, with it being temporarily on hiatus, but I feel like it's a decent story in of itself. It unfortunately does shift away from its initial premise of science into a more general beat-down cultivation, but it's a decent story in its own right, which I recommend anyone into cultivation to at least give a spare glance. Jackal Among Snakes is an isekai into another game one, but it's really good. It became one of my favorite isekais of the last year due to its action, characters, and world building, which I all love. This is one of my most recommended isekais, at least in terms of web novels. Sexy Sect Babes. Very nice, very enjoyable observer isekai. I'm sure you don't need me to elaborate on the type of novel this is. Perhaps check in on the author's previous work. Master, This Poor Disciple Died Again Today is probably just a good example of a Chinese wuxia isekai novel, but obviously with a Western author. MC essentially goes around pretending to be weak and to die in order to get out of fights. Pretty good length if you're looking for something substantial. Dungeon Life is a recent Dungeon Core isekai I've found. There's not too much one could say about uniqueness going on in terms of comparing it to past Dungeon Core stories, however it doesn't feel like a grind to read, which is a major issue that a lot of other Dungeon Core stories have. Recommend checking out. Tales from the Underside. How to Maintain a Questionable System in Progress is a recent isekai involving a man who has been roped into acting like an IT surveyor for this really half-assed level system she implemented based on his musings. Really doesn't read, is a fun story to go through. The Caretaker of Otherworldly Tenants is a reverse isekai which has heavy inspiration from Japanese isekai writing. Focus on slice-of-life social interactions between the dorm caretaker and his tenants. Truthful Transmigration is a cultivation novel where the MC comes out from the get-go because he knew he wouldn't be able to lie about replacing the body he now uses. The family comes to terms with it, and the story goes from there. The Forgotten Dream of Tana series is a good observer isekai where an urchin gains memories of a space explorer and seeks to use the knowledge to raise his status. There are currently 2 books, Wisher Beware the first book, which is completed, and Icodicius, the second book, which is ongoing. Highly recommended reading it. I genuinely enjoy it, and it's a recent read I'm glad I came across. I read it on QuestionableQuesting, but you can find it on ScribbleHub as well. Stranger Than Fiction is an isekai that takes some inspiration from mythical beings and world building with them. The character interactions are enjoyable, with the world building being another good aspect about this novel. Highly recommend giving it a shot, or at least putting it on a plan to read list. My Children from Another World is the story of an ex-adventurer father who has to deal with the stress of raising his children and keeping them safe from the world, especially due to their unique nature. Really good story. Recommend checking it out. Rumble Circuit is a sci-fi/fantasy isekai gamelet that focuses on the man named Juanis who has to fight if he wants to earn enough money to make a living. Overall, it is a really fun story with the added bonus of custom art that the author draws. Recommend taking a glance if it sounds up your alley. I became a biologist in a fantasy world. A budding scientist in a fantasy world and The Way Ahead are the top sciencey stories currently on Royalroad. If you like the idea of an MC taking a scientific approach to exploring the world and their powers, I highly recommend trying these out. Be warned though, Biologist is on hiatus with rare sporadic updates, and likely for the foreseeable future, but it's what started the science trend way back on Royalroad. The Way Ahead is also completed. I highly recommend giving it a shot. The Wandering Inn. This can be found on wanderinginn.com. It is single-handedly the best isekai there is, and my favorite going on for 4 years. I cannot highly recommend it enough. It is the only novel that I have never missed or put off an update in order to binge later. It is also the only story I've ever commissioned stuff for. It is the pinnacle of isekai for me at the moment and is my favorite story of all time. The only potential pitfall is the first volume, which is a bit rocky compared to the rest of the volumes, but the author has been slowly rewriting it and is likely going to finish rewriting in a few months. The only reading I would say not to try it out immediately is because reading it will spoil you and make most other isekai pale in comparison. That comes to a close of my experiences and my recommendations. If I didn't mention something you like by name, post it in the comments and I'll mention whether or not I've seen it and my view on it. I'm relatively well versed, but I'm definitely not as up to date with Asian isekai, or even all English web novel isekai as well. I know all about top web fiction and other sites being the thing, but I just don't have the time to be everywhere, including stories that are only hosted on the author's WordPress sites. But if you do know one that you really think is good, drop it below and I promise that I will check it out. Furthermore, although Royalroad is known for isekai lit RPGs, it is not the only genre it contains. I've seen several amazing stories, which are must-reads that I did not talk about in this video and are hosted there, that you would be missing out if you decided not to bother trying out RR due to the isekai I've listed not being your thing. That's all for now, until next time.